Very soon, the leaders of the free world will be trying to get through not one, but two top-level summits with the President of the United States. And they got a sneak preview of how that's going to play out today when the Trump administration announced that it may well tear up the Aukus submarine deal with Australia. Now, the Aukus Pact was agreed back in 2021 between Britain, the US and Australia to build nuclear-powered submarines for the latter in the face of China's growing military presence in their backyard. And the US was going to sell them submarines to keep them going in the meantime. And it caused a stir at the time because it replaced an existing deal between Australia and France. And then President Biden didn't even tell French President Macron what was actually happening till after they publicly announced it. Military pacts like this one are, by their nature, long-term agreements because obviously serious military hardware takes a lot of time to properly plan out and put together. But for the Trump team, it seems there is no agreement so long-term and established that it can't just be torn up, or at least threatened to be torn up, at a whim. And the excuse for getting cold feet about this deal is that, yes, you guessed it, Trump and his yes men are worried that it's not sufficiently about America's benefit to the exclusion of all others, officially described by the White House as America First, increasingly unofficially known by everyone else as America Only. Anyway, a senior Trump official in the Department of Defense, Elbridge Colby, has demanded a review of the project. The reason seems to be the impact on the administration cast by the long shadow of China's rapidly growing navy. From the point where America professed to be so far ahead of everyone else that it saw itself as untouchable, now you have Colby fretting that the plan under AUKUS for the US to sell up to 5 Virginia-class submarines to Australia, that is, quote, crazy. Crazy because given the possibility of a Chinese invasion of Taiwan, the US might need every single nuclear-powered submarine it can possibly lay its hands on. So the language being used is pretty familiar by now. The US would carry out a review to see if it's suitably America first, but allies need to step up for their collective defence. If you or I were British or American government officials, we might be spitting back at that, because you would have assumed that signing a deal with the US for nuclear-powered submarines kinda was stepping up. But of course that would be very self-indulgent of us. The actual British and Australian governments are currently taking it very calmly, projecting back to the US that of course they would carry out a review. After all, Britain also reviewed the project last year. I mean, okay, not a bonkers let's toss a coin and decide whether we're going to just tear it up review. But even so. So a British spokesman said, it is understandable that a new administration would want to review its approach to such a major partnership, just as the UK did last year. Like I said, not exactly as the UK did last year. The UK will continue to work closely with the US and Australia at all levels to maximise the benefits and opportunities which AUKUS presents for our three nations. The Australian Defence Minister Richard Marles said something similarly soothing and business as usual. It is natural the administration would want to examine this major undertaking, including progress and delivery. However, the Financial Times heard from officials that behind the scenes, both countries were, quote, incredibly anxious. Well, they may as well sail the groove of that feeling, because you're going to have to think it's pretty much going to define their lives for the next few weeks, because just a few days from now we will be into the G7 summit in Canada. No doubt Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, who will be present at that summit, will be looking to have a quiet meeting with Trump on the sidelines of the main event. Quite possibly Britain's Keir Starmer will join them as well for at least part of that discussion. Then you have to wonder just how Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney will be coping with hosting the meeting, with the toddler-in-chief from across the border at liberty to wander around the place setting off fire alarms and all sorts of other charges. Trump has toned down but certainly not forgotten all his rhetoric about Canada becoming the 51st state. But there are tariffs still in the air, there is significant damage being done to the Canadian economy because of his actions, and the threat of more to come. And at any point, he could choose to do something calculated to make a drama, to embarrass his host, or just another day, as it's known in the White House. When you hear that it's already been decided that this meeting of the G7 will not even attempt to agree a joint communique to be released at the end of the summit, as is customary, it tells you everything you need to know about people's expectations for the conversations to come. Because in the past, they've had joint statements talking about, for instance, global free trade and economic cooperation. Well, that one's out. They had statements talking about the importance of cooperation on fighting climate change. Yeah, probably not. Last year, they also had a statement about gender equality. I'm thinking no. And since 2022, they've had statements, of course, about Russia's aggression and breaking of international law in its war against Ukraine. And that's 0 for 4, since Trump has most recently been whining that Ukraine actually carried out an effective strike against Russia, which spoiled his day. And it didn't go unnoticed that Secretary of State Marco Rubio was this week to be seen congratulating the people of Russia on the occasion of Russia Day. Basically, the less that group has to agree to, in words that actually mean something specific in the real world, the less obvious the huge rift between the US and everyone else will be obvious and made worse. And that's before the US has even had an opportunity to spring a surprise on the rest of the group, because we know how much Trump likes to be the centre of attention, and big, bold, and I should say sometimes ridiculous proposals are often to be found serving that need. And then, shortly after that, it's the annual NATO summit at The Hague, so some people get to do it all over again. The NATO summit will have a bunch of partners all pretending that they still believe that America is a fully committed treaty member, meaning that if there's an attack on any other NATO member, then America will join the others in responding as though it had been an attack on them themselves. Does that sound especially America first to you? No, I mean, if you're capable of embracing the admittedly not that complicated concept of enlightened self-interest, then you might say yes. But of course we know that in the real world as it exists today, in practice that means no. We will have lots of NATO members talking with justification about how substantial a commitment to increased defence spending they have recently been making. All the NATO members officially want to be seen as good allies, so that Trump won't take umbrage and go stomping off. Unofficially, they really do realise that he has de facto stomped off already in all but name, so really that added defence spending is just the stark realisation that they kind of get that they are on their own from this point forwards. And having it sprung on them without advance notice, as seems to be the modern way, it has left them for a period of time to come, extremely exposed and vulnerable. So yes, a lot of the summit will focus on cash, because that's the process they're embarked on, that's what they're trying to use as leverage. Really, though, the more important task is going to be for the countries that remain to start looking at where that cash is spent, how much they need to coordinate to complement each other's strengths, to backfill behind America, rather than simply to replicate themselves. It's officially recognised that America's pulling back at least, so even if you pretend they're still going to remain around, you can at least focus legitimately on spending in areas that backfill from where they're retreating from. So that would focus on areas such as intelligence collection, deep strike firepower, cybersecurity, logistics. And the US will want to remain the centre of attention because it will be Trump, and even though they're planning on pulling back. And the most obvious way to do that would be for Trump to play an ongoing game of will he, won't he, when it comes to formally withdrawing from NATO. Now, I could be wrong about that. He has a lot more energy and creativity focused on how to do disruption than I could ever replicate, but I guess we'll all find out in due course. It's worth noting that just before the G7, France's President Macron will be visiting Greenland, making a clear statement of solidarity with them and with Denmark, and showing that Europe stands against interference in their political freedom. The timing for that visit isn't accidental, of course. It just gives you more of a sense of the jousting and pushback and counter-pushback that is going to be featuring in a couple of days. What the G7 and NATO members will really be seeking to do, it seems to me, is to get the United States to declare itself at last. Is it really an ally, albeit a capricious and unreliable one, or is it now an adversary? Because if it's going to take Russia's side in the Ukraine war, as it has consistently been doing, if it's going to threaten a European territory with annexation, as it is with Greenland and Canada, and if it is going to apply economic pressure on countries with a view to forcing them into deeply unequal trade relationships, as it's doing with just about everybody, if it is going to, officially, as the government of the United States, campaign actively on behalf of the farthest right of the far right parties in every country, seeking to undermine the integrity of the democracy of those countries in so doing, then it is, de facto, an adversary. And the free nations of the world need to understand that so they can protect themselves. They should expect that the US Secret Services will be infiltrating them with a view to doing them harm. They should expect that if they show weakness, that will be exploited by this adversary. All of those countries are trying to put that moment off by pretending it's all business as usual, in the hope that if you pretend that, then the world will continue to carry on as though that were true for a little while longer. And that, of course, is probably what they have to do. But some of us would be relieved just to have an honest and clear understanding of, okay, what is the situation we're really in? Because it would be a start for our not especially bright leaders, let's face it, in actually working out what they have to do about it. In the meantime, Chinese state media were crowing about the US likely U-turn on the Aukus project. I guess they think it serves their interests better to have America tearing up its alliances than it makes a difference to them having a handful more US submarines in the ocean. Which is exactly why this sort of stuff matters.